at some of the species that we found and talk about them. Put the trap out last night, partly because it was a nice night, partly because it was the only night I could actually manage in January this year, and partly because later on today there is the UK Moth Recorders meeting, where various people who are interested in moths in the UK get together virtually this year. Good morning, Fiona. Various people who are interested in moths get together virtually this year it is, and hear about the latest research, the latest findings, what we know, what's going on. And because of COVID, they weren't able to organise it where it usually is, up in Birmingham. So that gave me the opportunity this year to run a trap the night before and have a look at a few moths just before the meeting starts, which is an advantage, although it is a real shame that we're not seeing all the other lepidopterists that I would otherwise be seeing. But anyway, we had a few traps out last night. We got a few species, not vast numbers, still early in the year, and the variety of species that you get in January is necessarily a bit more limited than you would get later in the year. But we have got a few things, so we'll have a look at some of these and see how they're doing. Just start turning the trap around, the camera around in just a second. Just go check something in this book to remind myself, just checking the field guide to remind myself of something about this species before we have a look at it. I'm pretty sure this feeds on a load of stuff. So the first species, and this was the commonest species we got in the traps last night, was one called a chestnut. Turn the camera around and we will have a look at that sitting here in this pot. Will the camera focus? Try that. Not particularly in a focusing mood. Let's put them out on the table. And with any luck, that light's not brilliant. Let me go and get a source of illumination and try and add a bit of light to the subject. Well, there's a bit more light there, which hopefully you can see. So this is one of the noctuid moths. There's a bit of light. Fairly brown, there was a black spot on the wings, fairly common. This was the species we got most of last night. Feeds on a wide variety of different broad-leafed trees. And because it feeds on a lot of different species, of course, it's therefore able to be fairly common. The next most common species we got, let's see if I can make this focus, because this may well fly away if is a spring usher. As the name suggests, yeah, nothing came to sugar, Fiona. Spring usher, as the name spring usher suggests, this is a species that occurs in winter and into early spring and just tells you the turning of the seasons is on the way. And it's quite a variable moth, another one that feeds on a wide variety of food plants. This is the same species, sitting in a slightly awkward position, but as you can see, much more starkly marked, this one. But exactly the same species we were looking at before, spring usher. So here's the two of them. They're both the same species, and indeed this is a third example of spring usher. So all three of them are the same species. It shows quite a lot of the variety. And until you sort of get your eye into the moths, until you get your eye tuned into what the features are, you might well think these are quite different, but the general shape, size of the wings. You can on most of them make out these wavy cross lines, even on the dark one. If you stare closely, you can. That makes that easy enough to identify. Another moth in the similar group to the spring ushers, the geometrids, but slightly different, quite a different resting posture, is the March moth, named for the time of year at which it flies, but obviously it's January, so it's a little bit early, but not exceptionally so. Hello, David. We're just looking through some of the moths from last night. Thanks for the award, David. That's always appreciated. This is the March moth. Like a lot of the species at this time of year, this one is a species where the females have much reduced wings and can't fly. So this is a male, and it sits with its wings in this fairly distinctive posture. A bit of light reflection on the pot, unfortunately, but hopefully you can make it out. Again, a species that's fairly common. I think it feeds on a wide variety of food plants. Again, let me look up the food plants whilst we're talking. The caterpillars of this. When I talk about food plants, I nearly always mean caterpillars. There are relatively few moths that are particularly specialised in what they feed on as adults. They tend, most of them feed on nectar, and any nice sugary nectar will do. But the caterpillars can be a bit more specialised in what they can cope with. And this feed on quite a lot of common plants: oaks, hawthorns, blackthorns, crabapples, willows, field maples, pretty much all of which we've got in here. So another species. And another species typical of the start of the year. I might have to try and open the pot. Hopefully this won't fly away. Let's see if we can get an angle on this one. Oops. Not the best angle, I'm afraid. It's sitting in an awkward position in the pot. But this is a pale brindled beauty. Again, one of the commonest species of moth at this time of year. Can be pretty large numbers of them. And again, it's a species where the female has no wings. So if we look at the pictures in the book here, it's this one here. This is pale brindled beauty, but the females of this species are completely wingless. So obviously they don't fly into my light traps. I think I have found a female of this once crawling on a tree trunk, but didn't find one last night. And again, it's a common species, and again, it feeds on... Oops, stay still, camera. Feeds on quite a lot of broadleaf trees, shrubs, things like that, which is why it can be so common, because it feeds on so much different stuff. So, again, one of them only. Onto the smaller moths now, some micro moths. And this one, let's see if a bit of light helps or if it hinders. No, the light probably doesn't help that much there, does it? This is a much smaller moth. It's probably a little bit less than 1 centimetre long. This is Tortricodes alternella. And again, let me just check what it feeds on. Again, I think this is a fairly polyphagous, feeds on a lot of things. Micro moth. So I'll just quickly look it up and remind myself what it feeds on. That's the wrong book to look at. But a fairly distinctive two-toned moth, and again, pretty typical this time of year. I have on occasions had hundreds of these moths. night. And yeah, again, it feeds on a wide variety of trees and shrubs, often using the caterpillars using silk to spin the leaves together or turn the leaves down to create a little hidey place for them. And there were quite a few of them flying around last night. Oops, dropping the lid. And then the final moth I've got to show you. See if Fiona can guess this one. Fiona is another moth person who often joins me here at Powvale Wood. So that was quite an interesting one when we saw it in the trap. Do have a guess if you want, Fiona, or not a guess, do have a say what you think it is. It's one of the Tortrichidae moths. Tortrix moths. So we think, although we'll have to check this out properly, that this is a Cleris logiana. It's a species that feeds on birch, which we don't have a lot of in this reserve. I'm trying if we have any birch in the reserve. We certainly don't have much. So not common here, and it may well be that we've not recorded this on this site before. So I'm going to check I've got the ID right properly later on. I've hopped on here before going through the books as thoroughly as I could have done. But given the type of moth it is, the grey colour, and the time of year it is, I think it is likely to be a Cleris logiana, and therefore likely to be a species new to this site. It's not a rare species particularly. Well, it's probably the least common of the things we've seen today. Its distribution is considered very local, and it has rather a weird distribution here in the UK. If I have a look at the distribution map in the book here, in that it was previously only known from the more northerly parts of Scotland, and then it's suddenly being found down here in southern England, which is rather interesting. So my guess is that the Scottish population was here, and this is colonisation from mainland Europe down here, rather than the Scottish population having leapt over the Scottish lowlands, most of the rest of England, and established here. But I'm not sure it's really known for certain. But that is, assuming I'm right, a Cleris logiana, and rather a nice record, and rather nice to add a new species to the site list. That's rather interesting. I did look at Cochiella, Fiona, because it did seem better marked for that. But Cochiella basically is present June to August, so that would be exceptionally out of season. But that was, it is closer in appearance, you're right, to a Cleris Cochiella. But there's the flight season. Yeah, I mean, it could well be a Cochiella that's just come out. And it does over winter in the right area. So I will check those both out properly later on and see what they are. So there we go. It's that was the species we got. and I will have a proper look at them and do them properly later on. And here we are looking out into the reserve just to end on. But I'm going to sign off now, and then a bit later on today I will be attending the virtual UK Moth Recorders Conference. So we'll see people. If anyone is going to that, we will be in the same virtual Zoom room.